business has continued as normal. We'll be looking a little later at what is effectively the Mayor's last budget. What does it indicate about what his legacy is likely to be? Here for the duration, one of the Mayor's greatest fans, Emily Thornberry, Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury, and Mike Freer, Conservative MP for Finchley and Golders Green. And first up, we've talked a lot in past weeks about devolution, more powers for City Hall. But what about different models to this? 9 London boroughs got together this week indicating they want to go it alone. They're from east and north-east London, including Newham, Havering, Enfield, Tower Hamlets. Your views about this, Mike Freer? Kick us off.
Well, in principle, there's nothing wrong with having some devolution and local decision-making, particularly on budgets, provided it is fiscal autonomy. What we need to be careful of is that the group of 9 councils don't think they can raise money in East London and use the other London boroughs as a cash point as well. So it's fine if it's ring-fenced and they're raising their own money to spend locally as they see fit, but they can't have that and dip into the pockets of the other London boroughs as well. So they can't have it on both sides, but in principle it's something we should look at. You were
a former leader at Barnet.
Yep.
I mean, you didn't have thoughts or discussions about merging with other authorities, but you had a very distinctive style. We'll all remember what Barnet tried to do. Well, would you think there would be an argument for that kind of, agglomeration or getting boroughs together more like that?
Well, I think I'm not a great fan, personally, not a great fan of these sub-regions. Individual boroughs can be big enough to be distinctive, and certainly in Barnet we tried to what was called the Barnet Bond, was raising money on the back of the growth to invest in local infrastructure. So it can be done. So I'm not against it in principle, provided it is about raising money locally to be spent locally rather than spending someone else's money.
Yeah, what Robin Wales has been saying at Newham here is that, the conversation has been too much about discussion of the Mayor or City Hall or devolution there. But in fact, East London is a different kind of region. He said it isn't represented or necessarily represented that well by a mayor. You need to bury down a bit lower. Would you go with that?
I think we have to start with City Hall, and we have to start with the Mayor. And I think that there are certainly times when London needs to have a strong voice and we don't feel that we're getting it. And there is a huge welling up of frustration about that. And I can understand that. I mean, there are certainly times when a borough can deal with a problem and perhaps a group of boroughs can deal with a particular issue. But I think time and time again at the moment, we are not getting a strong enough London voice, particularly to the government.
But I think what they've seen what has been happening in Manchester, the idea of authorities getting together and then trying to spend as much of the public spending in that area themselves, have the pot to share.
But I think that there's also times when Hackney, for example, and Islington and Camden, and that sort of north inner London group actually has a great deal in common as well, and won't necessarily have as much in common with some of the outer boroughs. So you need to have mixtures of local authorities depending on what the issue is. But as I say, I think it just comes back to this feeling that whilst we're talking about devolution across the rest of the country, we're not really getting a very good deal in London.
No. Well, let's look at one aspect of that, City Hall finances. The Mayor is about to present what is effectively his last budget. I mean, certainly it's what he intends to spend over his last year. Now, a few extra powers have, of course, transferred to the Mayor over the last 7 years, and there's a lot more money coming in from fares, for instance, meaning it's now a budget of nearly £17 billion. Andrew Crine has this.
London, early 2008. Pre-crash, pre-iPad, a skyline markedly different from today, and an Olympic Park that was still just a hole in the ground, struggling for popularity. These are Ken Livingstone's last days as Mayor, and there were, of course, none of these. Back in 2008, Boris Johnson was a bit of an unknown quantity. He hadn't done very much, he hadn't really run anything. Now, the first line of attack from the Labour Party was to try and call him a kind of right-wing extremist. Ken Livingstone even dubbed him as to the right of Norman Tebbit. But 7 years on, the numbers tell a different story.
There's no doubt that if you look at the full suite of Boris Johnson's budgets since 2008, he does look more like a moderate centrist or centre-left mayor than a centre-right one. Now, it's true there are some parts of the budget, police and fire, that have faced reductions, but these are really ones feeding through from national government austerity.
The biggest spending spree has been in transport, up from 9 billion to 11 billion. In part, that's more people travelling, but also new Boris bikes, new bike lanes, a cable car, new buses, Crossrail and more. Mr Johnson has borrowed money to pay for it, but also put up tube and bus fares by over 40%, according to Labour.
TfL is turning into a piggy bank. He's not really spending the money on infrastructure, he's spending it on little projects like his garden bridge or the cable car, which are not really going to help main travellers in London.
In fact, this week, the Mayor's own policing deputy appeared to agree with Labour's notion that fares can go down. He wants to be the next Conservative candidate for Mayor and has made this cut his key priority.
Tube fares have to come down. They're the highest in the world at the moment. The challenge for a future mayor is to find the right way to bring them down.
But although his fare hikes don't sit easily with all Tories, Boris Johnson's City Hall does have one impeccable Conservative credential. He's frozen or cut his share of the council tax every year, meaning the average Band D household now pays 295 quid rather than the 310 they would have paid in 2008.
Every year Boris Johnson has been obsessed with announcing, first it was council tax freeze, then council tax reductions, but in reality these are pitifully small amounts. It works out at just a penny a day reduction on the council tax, but he can claim that he's cutting it.
Rather than focus on an annual announcement about cutting council tax, some say that the Mayor should have focused money on building housing.
If the council tax is merely frozen over the next 3 years, rather than cut as he proposes, then that money would support a more than doubling of the affordable house building in London. It would support a capital investment of around £2 billion. And that would build between 50 and 100,000 new affordable homes in our capital.
Since becoming mayor, Boris Johnson has become, according to some polls, the most popular politician in Britain. But what if you suggest better ways of dealing with things like this? Or this? When it comes to the nitty-gritty of running City Hall, people from all parties, including his own, seem to have plenty to say.
And one of those people is Andrew Boff, who leads the Conservatives at the London Assembly and wants to be the next Mayor of London. First of all, you have to become the Conservatives' candidate for Mayor, but welcome to you. Has Boris Johnson failed over the last few years to find the savings, find the reforms that you think he should have done?
No, I think generally speaking, GLA Conservatives have been very supportive of what he's done. We've always had some helpful suggestions, and we've always tried to push him that little bit further on things like the precept cut. But generally speaking, he's had a very impressive record.
So you think he could have cut the council tax by more? How?
Yeah, I mean, even though over the term of his office, he would have in real terms cut the council tax by about 40% actually, and that's very impressive. We wanted him to get there further, and we kind of think that the pressure that we've put on Boris in the past has resulted in these cuts.
But you also feel, from looking at the suggestions you've made for this budget, that he hasn't tackled reforms of Transport for London and has not found the savings there that he should have done.
I think TfL is worth looking at again. I think there's some structural issues there, and I think we have let the Mayor know that if there's going to be any further increases in fares for Londoners, that should be coupled with some kind of fundamental reform.
What do you mean when you talk about structural reforms, though? What do you say?
Well, I think
they will say they've made billions of savings and efficiencies over the years.
But it's still largely an opaque body. I mean, and in that it's no different from when it was under Ken. And I mean, one of the ideas that we might want to entertain is the idea of splitting up TfL in between operations and the capital investment, the big projects that they're going to do, so we can have more of a scrutiny and stewardship over how that money is being spent. And that's a suggestion for the way forward, but we do think TfL needs to be looked at.
Do you think it's possible to cut fares year on year by 3%? That's Stephen Greenhouse, one of your rivals for this crown.
Well, as I say, I mean, that sounds like a really good idea, and if it really stacks up, I'll nick it. Because I do believe that this period of almost automatic increases has got to come to an end soon. He's quite right when he says that Londoners pay quite a lot for for travel, and there has been a justification. We needed the infrastructure investment over the years, so there's a justification for that. But that argument's kind of wearing out now.
But broadly speaking, when you look at areas, housing, less money being coming from the government there, policing, cuts there. Right, you've identified transport, but actually there hasn't been much money. It's been an austere time. It's difficult to play with.
And is it not quite incredible that in that austere period we've managed to build, over his term, he would have built 100,000 affordable homes. And that is a greater figure than the early 80s, since the early 80s.
Well, using
and
whose money? Using whose money?
His predecessor was
using
unable
whose money?
to...
The money from which programme? Set up by Labour or set up by the Conservatives?
Well, it's the money that's available to the Mayor of London.
Available from which government?
And still available to the Mayor of London.
I always have to ask every time. The Labour government,
and still available to the Mayor of London.
But you think he's actually been a good... overall, he's been a very good custodian of the money.
He has been, and he's managed that programme extremely well.
Right.
We've got, as I say, a record number. I am his first critic insofar as I think it should be more. But what we need is to change the incentives. In fact, one of the suggestions that we have on his budget is that he should start to invest in things like which make contributions, things like a self-build programme, which will enable the sons and daughters of White Van Man to actually identify homes and build them in the areas that they live.
Let's bring you in. He's been a kind of centre-leftish kind of mayor, apparently, and been a good custodian of public finances.
I was really surprised to hear that, because I just kind of look back and I think, well, what's happened? In what way is London different? What's he done? What would you look back and you go, oh, that's a Boris achievement? So you'd think, well, there's a cable car and there's some blue bicycles. But otherwise, what has he done? So you say about 100,000 homes, and one of those homes, affordable homes, because if you change the definition of what an affordable home is, you can get away with blue murder, basically. So one of the bits of blue murder was public money being spent on a flat that was being part sold as an affordable flat in Pear Tree Court in my constituency for over £700,000. That's not an affordable home. And there's a real... Sorry, all I'm saying is that in terms of transport, the fares just keep going up. There doesn't seem to be that many major changes, and we don't have the affordable housing that we need to have for our kids who want to stay in London.
Do you recognise that characterisation of what he's done?
Well, I know Islington is a little pocket in London which is perhaps different from what the rest of us have to live in.
What, the rest of London doesn't have problems?
I'm sorry, Emily, but if you're looking at... Let's look at some of the achievements. The council tax, the precept cut by 40%, a revolution in cycling, cycle superhighways, new buses, tube line investments, Crossrail 1 and Crossrail 2 on the way. That's more in his term of office than Ken ever managed. So while Ken was swanning around Venezuela trying to sign up cheap oil deals which delivered nothing, Boris has actually delivered for Londoners. Absolutely. And in my patch, we have built 6,000 new homes in the last 5 years, of which 1,300 have been affordable, of which some have been, and quite a lot have been, socially rented. So Islington might be a little enclave of wealth, but I have to say, most of London, Londoners have had a good deal out of Boris.
Well, first of all, Islington is the 6th poorest borough in the entire country when it comes to child poverty, right? So it's a very mixed borough. And do not tell me that you don't have families in Enfield saying, where are our kids going to live? Whether they're rich or poor, they're saying to themselves, how are our kids going to remain in Enfield? They were born and brought up here, but how are they going to live here? And that is a problem across the whole of London.
Enfield, and it's I don't represent Enfield.
Wherever you represent. I mean, but if Enfield out of London,
so if
it doesn't matter
zone
where.
One occasionally, Emily, you might find out where.
Behave yourself. So what I'm talking about is London as a whole, right? London as a whole, and this is a serious issue, is where are our children going to live? Are they going to be able to live in London or not? Has the mayor done anything about that? No, he hasn't.
And that's why we're helping
the mayor is now building Crossrail.
That's why my borough is building homes for rent, homes for part buy, part rent, and for outright purchase, and they're not at the £700,000 mark. And we're building.
How many
new
people have you got on the
schools.
housing waiting list?
Barnet's housing waiting list is down to just under 3,000.
And where are they going to go?
Well, because Barnet's building homes.
And what about the children?
Council should come up and talk to Barnet.
Talking of Islington homes, Andrew Boff, what's your feeling about housing and the kind of housing, whether the right balance has been struck in terms of affordability and design that the mayor's done? And let's look, for instance, at an Islington place, Mount Pleasant.
Yes.
For development there. What's your feeling there? Are you actually on the same page as the mayor?
I'm not astonished that we have to acquaint the Islington set with the geography of Greater London. I mean, Outer London is where the majority of Londoners actually live.
Do you want to talk about this issue, though?
But let's get on to Mount Pleasant. We were certainly objected to what happened at Mount Pleasant. We thought the design of Mount Pleasant was, well, it was a missed opportunity to create a really beautiful neighbourhood.
So have you been concerned about the wider picture of creating neighbourhoods?
I think you know, this is very important to the Boris message, actually, because what Boris has contributed to London. What Boris has done during a period of the worst economic crisis that London has known, brought to us by the last government, the worst economic crisis, he brought optimism and he brought positivity that meant investment carried on. And the start of the turnaround started in London because of people like Boris.
Well, and so people in China buying flats and leaving them empty is good for London.
Of a sunniness, of a sense of optimism, which in itself can be a very important generator.
I don't think that it helps. I don't think it helps if you go down the river now and look at all these big tower blocks and look at all these big private developments and how many of them had their lights on at night because people have bought those houses.
I have a final word on this.
Those houses are provided in partnership with a Labour council in Islington, and if that Labour council didn't want to build those expensive flats for rich people, they didn't have to.
No, I'm talking about the amount of development that is happening that is not being used, even by Londoners or anyone else, and that is a worry. And basically, Boris has no answer for that.
No more time.
No, that hasn't increased since the period of the last Labour government.
Andrew, it is really nice to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.
And now the Mayor has used a visit to Boston to re-announce his desire to see roads taken underground in tunnels, for instance in Hammersmith. Fiendishly expensive, a few people have said. And the thing about Boston is that some say it hasn't exactly worked well there either. Here's Kate Ford.
The Mayor of London has announced plans to redesign some of the capital's busiest roads by having stretches of them go through tunnels. Boris Johnson said work could begin at 5 locations, which would allow the land the road was on to be developed. The roads are the A4 in Hammersmith, the A13 in Barking Riverside, the A3 in Tolworth, the A316 at Chalkers Corner and the A406 in New Southgate. But the Mayor says tolls could be used to help pay for the work. He made the announcement during his trip to the US. Mr Johnson began his 6-day visit with a walkabout in sub-zero temperatures around Boston's Big Dig regeneration project, which saw major highways diverted underground. He said the Boston scheme had helped improve air quality and speed up traffic. Transport for London will now work with local boroughs on the proposals, and an analysis including funding options will be presented to the Mayor in May.
Mike, is it a pipe dream? Is it possible? I mean, tell us a bit more, if you know about it, about what happened in Boston.
Well, I went to see the Big Dig in Boston.
Did you?
Now it's completed. It's been a stunningly beautiful part of central Boston, and the traffic flows much better. But for 10 years it was gridlock, and Bostonians will tell you they were spitting feathers because they just simply couldn't move.
So could it happen here? Could we do it?
If we could learn the lessons from Boston and we could actually achieve it, would be like a terrific step change in the way our traffic moves in London. So in principle, it's something we should look at carefully if we can learn the lessons of what
Boris Johnson
wrong.
and the Conservatives would commit to that. Emily Thornbury, would you commit to infrastructure that properly tackles London's traffic problems here like this?
Oh, listen, I think that London generates the wealth of the country, and we should be investing properly in infrastructure in London. Of course we should. And
so
I think that
see that level of investment in roads.
I think that there's a number of things that we should be doing, and I think that we do not invest enough in cycling. I think that putting a bit of paint on roads is not actually investing properly in cycling.
But would you do these? Would you go for this road?
I think that some of the ones are practical and some of them are not. I think that there's a lot of stuff with Boris is kind of about photo opportunities, and when you look at the detail, it doesn't ever come to anything. I remember a year and a half ago seeing a press release about them. They were going to introduce trampolines down one particular road in order to help commuters bounce to work. I mean, a lot of it is just a kind of a bit of a joke.
He's been bounced out of doing that, he said, at City Hall the other day. But Mike, for on this wider point, on this point, don't you think isn't this likely to encourage the continued thinking about continued motor traffic in London, where we should be thinking the opposite long term?
No, I think we also have to be pragmatic and realistic. We are a car city. We can wean people off, and we've seen that in the revolution in cycling. But we have to realise that people will use cars and vans to get around London. So if we can take some of that underground, leaving the surface free for cycling and walking, then it's something we should look at.
OK, well, let's move on, because we've got a couple of other things to get through in a minute. The rest of the news in 60 seconds.
A crucial part of the Mayor of London's plan to improve cycle safety in the capital has hit a major problem.
the Royal Parks has refused to allow a segregated bike lane to be built in front of Buckingham Palace. The Chinese developer Zongrong has been given an ultimatum by Bromley Council to clarify its intentions for a new Crystal Palace or risk losing rights to the project. Bromley Council has asked the Zongrong Group for plans within 14 days. 100 more police officers armed with tasers are to patrol the streets of London. Met Commissioner Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe said more police officers armed with tasers are being deployed on the streets to meet the threat of a terrorist attack. Islington North Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn has described the Metropolitan Police's decision to make protest groups pay for traffic management at demonstrations as absolutely outrageous, and that making groups pay thousands of pounds could silence legitimate demonstration.
We'll come on to the cycling in a moment. First time we've seen you since that tweet in the Rochester by-election. How much damage has it been done as you're campaigning now ahead of the election?
We're doing quite a lot of campaigning in the constituency and getting a really good reception, actually. I went out yesterday, Stafford Cripps Estate, spoke to 49 people, 30 of them are voting Labour. It's cool. Are
you still getting stick, though, for it? I mean, is it still you being accused of having been sneering or patronising or whatever the criticism was at the time? And what do you think now with the passing of time about it?
I think that there's more important things to talk about. I think that we have an election coming up. I think we have a lot of people who are not paying tax at the moment. I think that we should be looking at that. I think we should be looking at infrastructure in London. I think we should be looking at the fact that the mayor is not doing his job properly. I think that we should be talking about the fact that London needs a louder voice. We need housing for our kids. These are really the important issues, I think.
Mike Freer, cycling, big hole in that, the Royal Park, saying that he can't keep his cycle superhighway going through. I know you're a big fan of cycling.
Well, I think I can understand why they want to, if you like, maintain the postcard vista. But I do think they need to think again. I mean, if they don't want the blue paint, that's fine. But let's be practical and try and find a way of making those approaches to these big monuments safer for cyclists. Because I cycle on a regular basis, and you do have to have your wits about you, especially when you're dodging traffic and tourists. Between the two, I think some form of segregation they need to revisit.
And we've just seen very briefly, we've seen the proposals for the superhighways going ahead. It's going to mean all kinds of disruption while they're built there around the embankment. We were talking about the big dig earlier.
Yep.
Do you wonder about whether this can be delivered and delivered quickly anyway?
Well, I think it can be delivered. I mean, I used embankment. I not only cycle along it, I also run along it. So I'm a bit wary if my cycling and running route are going to be changed. It's about learning the mistakes of Boston and making sure that we plan it so that we can deliver it.
And you'd feel the same way, Emily, presumably about the cycling network?
Yeah, I mean, I don't go down the embankment. I think it's too scary. I cycle up round the other way and tend to use the back streets. But I think, you know, we lost more cyclists again this year to lorries.
And we've got to do something about it. To you both, thanks very much for coming in. Andrew, back to you.